Hello there! Welcome to SKP Productions. I'm Crown Graze Cocon. Let's get into the video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about democracy, what it is, its history, and some of its limitations. So one of the most famous Democrats that we can think of is Winston Churchill. And he once said of democracy that it was the worst form of government, except for all others that have been tried from time to time. Now, why would he say something like that? What are the limitations of democracy? That's what we're going to go into in this video. Before we do, I'm going to give a massive shout out to, well, first of all, to my printer. Finally got that up and running. And also give a shout out to my friend Hugo for suggesting that instead of it being like at the beginning of the video, we'd be like, "Hello there. Welcome to SKP Production," and multiple different takes. He suggested just having it as one, and I think that it runs a lot more smoother. So if you like this video and you like some of the other videos and want to see more, I would definitely suggest liking, subscribing, and stay tuned for more videos. And also, light up the comment section with hopefully good comments. And if you have any respectful questions or debates or whatever you want to do in the comments, then please feel free. If you're just a hater, dab on the haters. So the word democracy comes from the Greek word for demos, kratos, yeah? So demos meaning people, kratos meaning power. So people power, power to the people, government for, by, and of the people, as Abraham Lincoln said. So, but what we think of democracy, a lot of us think that it began in ancient Greece, but in actual fact, if we look at the history, and that's what we're going to really delve into with this video, a lot of what we would describe as primitive democracy has really gone on since the dawn of civilization, if not earlier. So having systems whereby the leader of your tribe or your town or your empire, or whatever, is having your leader being picked by the people, or even by a handful of like important people and thing. It's that system goes back a long time. So you see examples of it in ancient Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt. You see examples of it in Sparta, but each of these eventually fell to tyranny, right? Which is, for those who don't know, it's dictatorship essentially, yeah. Like where instead of power to the people, it's power in the hands of one man and his minions, basically, right? So this is the complexities with democracy. Some of its flaws seem to be that it always, if a careful check is not kept on it, it nearly always seems to go straight back to tyranny. So we're going to look into why in this video. So what we refer to as Athenian democracy is the first example of a society being run by purely democratic means. So in ancient Athens, at around the time of 594 BC, so that's well over 2,500 years ago. So you had in ancient Athens, you had aristocracy, right? So you had a tiny elite group of people running the show, and this elite group was overthrown by Solon in 594, and over the next century or so, we start to see the development of what we refer to as Athenian democracy. So and the high point of this was with Seleucides. I'm sorry for butchering the name. So that was in 510 BC, and he's the first one who started actually labeling it as Democratus, yeah, as I just said. So this is when the male citizenry of ancient Athens were able to come together and start making laws and making decisions for the ancient city-state. And like they started setting up a code of laws by which the people of Athens would live by. And this culminated with the leadership of Pericles in 460 BC, whereby the citizens of Athens were chosen by lot, right? So they were chosen at random, and so imagine you have like the equivalent of like a parliament, right? But instead of you electing representatives, whether it's MPs or congressmen, etc., instead of that system, that it'd be a system where people, random members of the public, would be chosen, and they would be the officials, right? Who they would be the politicians essentially for I think a period of a year, and during that year they would have the power to the power would be in their hands to make the laws of Athens. Now, before we get into this, we just have to say with a massive caveat that even within this democratic society, it was still a situation whereby only adult male citizens of Athens had the right to vote. So this excluded women and this excluded slaves, who made up a huge proportion of the Athenian society. So in actual fact, when we talk about Athenian democracy, even at its high point, you're only talking about a relatively small section of the population who were actually had the right to vote. But even in these early times, you still had many critics of the system, notably with Socrates, followed by Plato, Aristotle, and many other of the great Greek philosophers that we think of. And all of them criticized Athenian democracy. But why? So the best way to think of it is this, right? So this analogy was used. So if you have a ship sailing on the ocean, on the open oceans, right? Who would you have being the captain of that ship? The argument from these philosophers and by many other critics of democracy would be that the most talented person, the person who's best able to be a captain of the ship, the person with the most knowledge, etc., they ought to be the captain of the ship. However, they criticise democracy as saying, actually, in democracy, it would just be the most popular person who would be chosen. So they might not necessarily be a good captain, but they might, like if they gave all of the sailors rum and let them party every single day, then they might curry favour in that sense. And so it wouldn't necessarily be the best person running the ship, but it would be, just the most popular person. Now, on a wider scale, this is what they criticised. They said that the government should not be a government chosen by the people. It should not be a government run by the people, because the people, they didn't have much faith in ordinary people, and they believed that the mob would essentially, pick politicians and pick laws that favoured themselves rather than what was actually virtuous, rather than what was actually helpful to the Athenian state. And yeah, so this is some of the criticisms that you see of it, and also you even in the modern times you see people saying people didn't know what they voted for, stupid, this, that, and these are all criticisms of democracy that people have. So yeah, we really have to look into some of the validity of that, and also just some of the wider history of democracy. And even Athenian democracy, twice within the space of 200 years that it was active for, the people of Athens voted against their own democratic constitution. Now, in both those cases, they were coerced by outside forces. I believe by one time it was the Persians, and the other times it was by the Spartans. But still, it was a thing of the people of Athens, depending on what was happening, could very quickly end up overthrowing the very system that had given them power in the first place, in order to essentially give more power to a tiny elite. And this is part of the reason why the system of Athenian democracy slowly decayed over time. People lost faith in the system, and a lot of historians and political commentators today have commented on some of the parallels of ancient Athenian democracy and the current state that we have in the Western world at the moment. And people say that the parallels between the two, where people are starting to lose faith in the system, where people are going more and more towards a tiny elite of people like with experts and stuff running the country. And these are very prescient and very valuable debates which are happening in the Western world right now. And it's something that will shape how we interact with the political system throughout the whole of our lifetime. Now, ancient Rome also tried. Ancient Rome was very much almost, you could think of ancient Rome as the kind of copy and paste masters of ancient Greece. Yeah. So what they tended to do is they looked at what the ancient Greece were doing and said, "Oh, we like that. We'll take some of that." And what they did is essentially they merged the political systems in many different Greek city-states and kind of came together. Well, this is with regard to the early Roman Republic, And so in the early Roman Republic, what you would have is two consuls, So these people would basically be the executives, So you can think of it almost like having two presidents, or having a president and a prime minister, as you have in many countries at the moment. So you have that as the executive, so this is the person who's in charge. Then you have the Senate, which are basically aristocrats. So one can think of this in terms of the current House of Lords in the British system, and how the US Senate was up until 1913 when they changed it so that ordinary people could actually elect senators. Before then, it was people were appointed by the states where they came from. And finally, you had the assemblies, right? So this is what we could think of as our current House of Commons and the House of Representatives in America. And so it was a mixed democracy as such. It was a mixture of different concepts, whereby you had the executive, you had the aristocracy, and you had the kind of like democratic assemblies, whereby power was dispersed. So for instance, having two consuls meant that instead of there just being one guy in charge, it's the two of them have to work together and play off each other in order to basically secure the liberty of the people of Rome. And when the US founding fathers were coming up with their constitution, it was a thing where they looked at ancient Greece, they looked at ancient Rome as a really big influence, and a lot of what you see in modern democracies is basically copying what was done in the ancient Roman Republic. But just as we saw with ancient Greece, we also saw that the ancient Roman Republic also went down the same road. So if any of you read the Shakespeare play Julius Caesar, you will see how after the death of Caesar, the whole state descends into civil war. And what ends up arising out of the ashes of that is the first emperor, with Emperor Augustus, which is where we get the month of August from. So once again we see a democratic system collapsing and a tyranny arising from that, right? And the Roman Empire at that point continued on until the fall of Rome. And throughout the rest of that time, you had despotic emperors, one after the other, becoming less and less competent in what they were doing. The only reason why they'd rise to power is because they had the backing of the army, and then as soon as the army would change to someone else, then there'd be another overthrow, and then another person would be put in, and it just became a very chaotic system, and people started to lose faith in the Roman Empire. And this is part of the reason why over many centuries the Roman Empire came and fell. But it was a thing where places which had not been conquered by Rome, such as ancient Germany, basically, in there where the Romans had not conquered yet, but where there was a lot of influence. In the tribal societies that we had in Germany, we had, you know, democratic systems there. So in many German places, they had what was called a thing, right? That's the actual name for it, a thing. So this was basically, we can almost think of it as like kind of early parliaments, yeah? So you'd have the king of a tribe, and his thing would be his noblemen surrounding him, and it's a thing of the king, you know, could act in a certain regard, but he'd also have to listen to his advisors, and he couldn't do things which took power away and took the liberty away from from these nobles. And you know, we start to see this with Anglo-Saxon England. So after the fall of Rome, the Germanic tribes from, you know, like the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes and all those kind of people, right, came from Germany and from modern day Holland and settled in England, and that's where we get the term England from, land of the Angles. You know, so it's Anglo-Saxon England, right, and it's where most of our language comes from. So in that system, we had in each of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, you had something that was called a witan, and again, this is what we can think of as a very early form of parliament that we've all come to know and either love or detest. So once again, it was a thing of the king being held accountable by his nobles, and he couldn't do things that the nobles didn't agree with, and you know, and so there were some checks and balances on the absolute power of the king, which was very much in contrast to how it was done all around the rest of the world, whereby, you know, if you're the king, you're just in charge, and everyone has to listen to what you do. And so within the kind of Germanic and Anglo-Saxon culture, you had this early checks and balances. Now, for many people, there's a bit of a misconception of this period. Yeah? We refer to it as the Dark Ages, refer to it as, you know, we think of like medieval times as really a backward time, but actually both technological improvements greatly continued after the fall of Rome, and also political developments also continued. And you know, even after the Norman conquest of Anglo-Saxon England, right? You know, in 1066, we still see that the system that was in place ended up having, you know, the system that the conquered people of England had before the Normans, yeah, ended up filtering up and influencing the conquerors, right? And so, you know, we see this with Magna Carta in 1215. So this is the first time where the the noblemen of the French origin noblemen have the same kind of idea as the people who they had previously conquered, where they went, hold on, King John is moving like tyrannical, you know, he's moving like a tyrant, and he needs to be kept in check, right? And that's what Magna Carta is, if you ever hear about it. Magna Carta is basically saying that the king might be in charge, but he is still held accountable by the people below him, and he cannot deprive them of liberty without due process of the law, right? And you know, this led to the first proper parliament we think of in 1265 in England, and you start seeing across much of Europe, we start to see the development of parliamentary systems. So even in Poland, you have what was known as the Golden Liberty in 1569, and you know, across many different states, you start to see the development of this kind of early form of not necessarily democracy in the way we'd think about it, but some form of parliamentary system where at least some people had a say in how the government should be run. Now, I really don't want to give the idea that, you know, the phenomenon of democracy is purely a European phenomenon, because what we can see with the Native Americans, what we can see with ancient African societies, many other places around the world, we start to also see this kind of these democratic societies arise. So notably, we could find with the Native Americans, we could find the Iroquois Confederacy. So this is a group of Indian tribes in the northeast of the modern day US, right? And these tribes came together and worked together and kind of said, right, for mutual defense, we will come together for decision making. We'll come together, right? So each tribe was still able to make its own decisions, independently of the others, but on matters where it benefited them to all come together, they would all come together. And this confederacy, we don't know fully when it arose. The historians kind of say anytime between 1000 AD and 1450 AD, which not very precise. That's like a period of almost 500 years, but anyway, right? So basically before there was an English Parliament, before there was any of these kind of things, right? We start seeing, very independently of anything to do with Europe, we start seeing these societies pop up. And the Iroquois Confederation lasted well into the early modern era, which is why the founding fathers of America, when they were drafting their constitution and they were thinking about the different powers that the different states would have, they looked to the Iroquois Confederation and thought, right, that's actually a good model, because we have states like New York, we have states like Virginia, we have all these different states with competing interests. So how do we bring them all together in a way where they're still able to be independent, but when they need to come together on certain issues, they can still come together? And so the founding fathers were really influenced by the Iroquois Confederacy. And then on top of that, where part of my family are from is the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria, right? And amongst them, as opposed to many of the other tribes in Nigeria and the surrounding area, which tended to be either kind of theocratic, so that they were run by religious authorities, or you had dictatorial, tyrannical kind of systems, right? But amongst the Igbo, you had quasi-democratic society whereby people there were able to have an input on the governing of the tribe, essentially, so really want to press this concept that democracy is not a European idea, right? It's spanned all societies all around, well, not all societies, but it spans the world, right? The ancient Aztecs had elements of it. Many societies have had elements of it, okay? So really get this idea out of your head that when you think of democracy, you think of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, because while what we think of in terms of it developed kind of political theory arose from these societies, you see many places completely independent of their influence also having some of these ideas.